Good morning. My name's Charlie Blocker. I am the CEO of IC Partners based here in Bangkok. I've been in the region for just over 20 years, covering ASEAN investments in real estate, operating companies, including hospitality and medical tourism. Really, I guess our ability to see forward opportunities as well as working with local partners and governments to achieve the best tax incentives and also de-risking projects. This is something that we really like working with clients on, including those for our own account. So I'm joined with Mr. Michael Doyle. Michael?
Hi, and good morning. I'm Mike Doyle. I'm a U.S. lawyer with the Bangkok law firm Seri, Manop and Doyle. I've practiced in Thailand for over 20 years. Today, Charlie and I will be talking about what's been going on with regard to the cannabis industry in Thailand and the region. I will be going through some of the legislative things that have been occurring, and Charlie will talk about the commercial market. Okay, so maybe we should just get started. Okay, so on February 19th of last year, Thailand became the first Asian country to legalize the production, sale, and use of medical cannabis. Okay, so this was a significant development for both Thailand and the region that could have long-term implications. It's also sparked a lot of interest among global pharma and cannabis companies who are eager to do business in the region. So this was definitely an important development, but as we'll discuss, it should be just seen as just one of a series of steps that will need to occur in order for Thailand to open up its cannabis market. And we're not just talking about talking about Thailand in Asia. Other countries in the region are taking steps in this direction as well, due to the increased knowledge concerning the health benefits of cannabis and the commercial opportunities presented by a properly regulated cannabis market. Okay. So today we will compare and contrast the approaches taken by three Asian countries with respect to cannabis regulation: China, South Korea, and Thailand. And we will see that both the objectives and the strategies for cannabis regulations in these three countries is completely different. When we get to Thailand, I'll hand things over to Charlie to present Thailand market information, and then I'll talk about what's been going on legislatively here. And then finally, we'll talk about the investment opportunities that we see here in Thailand moving forward. Okay? Okay, so first let's talk about what's going on in China right now. What is the Chinese government's objective with respect to cannabis? Now, when I talk about government objectives here, we're not necessarily talking about what the government says its objective is. Maybe they don't say anything about objective, or maybe they only put out some kind of PR statement. But what we're doing is we're looking at what is actually being allowed to go on in the market as an indicator of what the government wants the long-term direction to be for the industry. Okay, so we can all plan. So in China, the direction that the government wants to go is pretty straightforward. The government wants to build an export model to supply the $23 billion U.S. cannabis market, and also to supply Canada and Europe. Since 2017, the Chinese government has allowed farmers in Yunnan and Heilongjiang provinces to grow cannabis on hundreds of acres of farmland, where it is then processed into CBD. These two provinces are among China's poorest, and the farmers there say that they can make twice what they can growing corn and tobacco growing cannabis. So they are lining up to apply for grow permits. As of 2019, China is already producing 11% of the world's CBD, according to the Wall Street Journal, and they definitely want to increase that. Now, when we say they want to develop an export model, note here that almost all products containing THC and CBD are completely banned in China, with stiff penalties for violators. So there's little or no local sales opportunities at the moment. Farmers in these cannabis farms, or factories in these cannabis farms, are run by private and state-held companies, required to implement heavy security measures. Production is monitored by the government, and employees are drug tested often. And the government disposes of the residue created. There are no official numbers, but it definitely looks as though the cannabis industry is growing very quickly in southern China, which is causing some players in the market to become concerned about what the Chinese government may do moving forward in terms of regulation. Many are looking to what the government's approach has been in the past in other high-growth industries like online payments and cryptocurrencies, which also operated in a legal gray area, to see what the government might direction with regard to cannabis might be moving forward. For these two industries, the central government first allowed a lot of leeway, okay, and there was hyper growth and activity allowed, similar to what's going on with cannabis right now, okay, but then after those industries achieved a certain level of growth, the central government quickly came in and began to heavily regulate in a way that changed the market a lot and caused many of those initial investors to lose money. For online payment, Alibaba had 100 million users, despite the fact that it didn't have the required banking license, until the government stepped in and began to require that all online payments moving forward go through a central bank. For cryptocurrency, after allowing for a period of initial growth with little regulation, the Chinese government banned all cryptocurrency exchanges before announcing it would release its own state-backed digital currency. So it's quite interesting what's going on in China right now from a supply standpoint. However, there are definitely some things to keep in mind. First, keep in mind that increased regulation in China could come suddenly and without much notice. Also note that as China's primary market is the U.S., and it's a medical, and this is a medical product, the U.S.-China trade war could affect this industry quite a bit, particularly because the U.S. reliance on China as a supplier for medical products has become a political issue in the U.S. right now. For South Korea, the cannabis situation is also interesting, but completely different from China and Thailand. So what's going on there? So last year, South Korea also passed a law to allow the import of a very specific list of cannabis medicines. Before that, all cannabis products were banned, except those used for research and government projects. Okay, so why did they do that? It seems as though it was the result of an intense lobbying effort by groups of Korean patients with various chronic illnesses who wanted to access certain cannabis medicines that weren't otherwise available in Korea. The only medicines available there that have been approved for import to date are Sativex, Adios, Casamet, and Marinol, which may be imported only from an approved list of countries and prescribed only for a limited list of diseases such as Parkinson's, epilepsy, HIV, and AIDS. To date, these drugs have been allowed to be imported only, and local production in South Korea does not seem to be on the table. Any expansion of this list will be done by the Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety on a case-by-case basis, and since last year, more drugs have been added. So the patients are eligible to have access to these medicines is very narrowly defined, and the distribution requirement is quite strict. Patients seeking to obtain one of these medicines must submit an application, a doctor's diagnosis, their own medical records, and then await approval. So it's not a matter of just obtaining a prescription from an authorized physician. Also, patients may only receive these drugs through a central government distribution center. And these drugs only seem available to Korean citizens only, from a practical standpoint. So this is a very limited exception carved out by the Korean government. So you may ask, why even mention it? I mention it because it's a small step, but it's significant because it's the first time in Asia where it seems patients groups have successfully lobbied an Asian government to grant access to cannabis medicines, and then that list of approved drugs is gradually getting bigger. And because now that the Korean government has done this, it is much more likely that other governments in the region like Japan, Singapore, Taiwan might do the same. All right, so now let's move to what's going on in Thailand. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, Thailand became the first Asian country to legalize medical cannabis. Now, why did it do that? Okay, I've lived in Thailand for 20 years, and I can tell you, for matters like this, Thailand is a very conservative place. Thai law still doesn't even allow alcohol companies to list on the stock exchange here. For the last 93 years, there has been very little legislative movement with respect to cannabis. Then all of a sudden last year, there's been a lot of activity. Why? It seems like the Thai government has a plan to create a regulated medical cannabis market to meet the needs of both Thai and foreign patients here. But before I go on to what's going on legislatively, let's first hear from Charlie about what market opportunities there may be available to investors here. Charlie?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think on your slide in front of you on the display, just a quick snapshot on Thailand, which has been one of the real engines here in ASEAN for the better part of 2 decades. But a couple of the key thoughts coming out of Michael's comments, particularly on China, is like Alipay, is illegal, and they went forward with it, and now it is the dominant payment vehicle. He mentioned cryptocurrency. There was some entrepreneurs who started, and then all of a sudden the government took over and completely regulated it. So they probably weren't on the top end of the food chain. I guess the example there is there's a lot of disruption. And then also with regard to China, there is no domestic market because it's highly regulated. It's really an export machine, and it also helps the farmer. It's more of a populist type of legislation, if you will, and keeps economics far away from Beijing, spreading out the prosperity. In contrast, South Korea, which to our has no real commercial production, but you have governments listening to their constituents, to their citizens who see redeeming values with regard to cannabis medicines, and actually some leadership. And South Korea culturally does take a leadership role in all of Asia Pacific. So when we get to Thailand and we look at the size of touching up almost on 70 million people, we've been crushed by the COVID, no doubt, because of the heavy tourism, and I'll get into that in a little bit in terms of where those engines will restart shortly. But it's gotten its fair share of foreign direct investment. You can see here, inflation's always in check, this type of thing. We actually have even in the midst of COVID, we have still relatively low unemployment rates. But a couple of key things is we are an aging society here in Thailand. In about 2 or 3 more years, we will, for those between 60 and 65, we start to crest over that 13-15% level, and as we get into 2030 onwards. So aging society, different medicines applications will come into play. This is quite interesting. And then maybe just talking a little bit about Thailand's tourism. Last year, 2019, we had just a smidge under 40 million arrivals, a record. It puts us in the top 10 or 12 in the world for foreign arrivals. This year it'll be a fraction of that, sadly. But when you look at our source markets, it's China, Malaysia, India, South Korea, and Laos. These are now, some of those are cross-border, but a lot of it is tourism for leisure. Certainly there's some business travel, but most importantly, also ASEAN accounts for over a quarter of the foreign arrivals here. So ASEAN, the other 9 ASEAN nations come here in the flight frequency, and it's a repeating destination. Let me just advance this on a little bit here. So there are 2 things that I want to frame up as Michael talks about some of the legislation that has occurred just in the last less than 12 months, frankly, 12, 15 months. Medical tourism and wellness tourism, they are different. Thailand is one of the top 5 destinations for inbound medical tourism globally, and that's head count as well as spend. Just last year we had over 1 million foreign arrivals. When I say last year, 2019, just over 1 million arrivals, which was about 2.5, 2.7% of those 40 million arrivals. And even with all the education and a slightly, I guess, more developed economy, Singapore, we actually exceed and excel in medical tourism over Singapore. India has gotten to be quite a hub and destination. So we really get more than our fair share. The market is growing. Medical tourism is definitely growing. Now that includes the whole wide spectrum, from whether it's heart surgery or could be cosmetic surgery, as well as knee replacements, etc. So that does include it. But people come here they trust Thailand. This is the key point, and the doctors and the training and the education and the regulation. So I think it's growing. I guess the real factor, I think, for Thailand is they map out the next 10 years, and this is part of their plan, is that they do want to, they see Thailand as being, and medical procedures being a strategic advantage for continuing to attract investment and the high value added tourist. Now, wellness tourism, I guess that didn't maybe exist 10 years ago per se, or at least it wasn't as pronounced. But frankly, medical tourism at its core has really grown out of the genesis of, I'll just mention 2 leaders in the industry, Kamalaya down in Koh Samui, and the very famous Chivasom, just about a 2-hour drive from where we're sitting right now. But they were the ones that were pioneering what is good for your body, exercise, diet, the holistic approach of how someone will come and rejuvenate themselves, their mind, their soul, but also just de-stressing. And as a result of that, when you think about that wellness spending, again, you can see here on the table that this data is about 2+ years old, but Thailand ranks up there quite a bit in terms of the number of trips and then the actual expenditures. We're in the top 5 for that wellness tourism. There's a corridor, again, a key takeaway. This is an engine that's already been turned on for about 4 or 5 years, is the Eastern Economic Corridor, formerly known as the Eastern Seaboard. But 2 of its top 10 priority industries, as you can see here, are what they've called the affluent medical and wellness tourism. Yes, that's in the Eastern Corridor, but it manifests itself over the entire country. And then comprehensive medical. These are things that are in place that are part of the strategic map of Thailand. So you have a lot going for you in wellness. People who are just coming for sun and fun, but also stumble into that I can do some wellness things. And I think the offer of cannabis is really not there today, at least not only domestic for the Thai people themselves, but also for foreign tourists. So back to you, Michael, because I think you'll frame up really some of the legislation that's very encouraging.
Thanks for that, Charlie. Okay, so what was the legislative activity in Thailand that I just referred to? Okay, so the biggest thing that happened was on February 18th last year, when the government amended the Narcotics Act to allow for the production, import, export, and sale of cannabis for medical and research and development purposes. So that was important, not because it immediately changed the market, okay, but rather because it sets forth a legal framework for parties to apply for and obtain licenses to legally engage in cannabis-related activities. So the amendment also set forth what future foreign investment might look like in this sector. As you'll see in my point 2 here, it states that foreign investors may hold up to 1/3 of the shares and 1/3 of the board seats of Thai private companies that, number one, apply themselves to obtain one or more of these cannabis licenses, and two, to hold shares in Thai private companies partnering with with government parties to obtain one or more of these licenses. So this is a quite interesting development, but there was also an important restriction. This amendment created a 5-year exclusivity period, during which time only government parties would have standing to receive medical licenses. Therefore, until February 19, 2024, only government parties are to receive medical licenses, but the law allows the government licensee to partner with private parties on those projects, including those private parties with minority foreign shareholders. Also, this exclusivity period only mentions medical applications. So the implication is that private companies may still independently be allowed to apply for research and development licenses during this 5-year period. Okay, so as of last year, only the government parties may apply for medical licenses, but they may partner with private companies with up to 1/3 foreign shareholders and directors. Okay. A Thai party who is partnering with the government licensee for the medical license or applying for the R&D license. There may be opportunities for foreign companies, may also be opportunities for foreign companies to be a third-party service provider and provide equipment and technology to government and Thai private licensees. All right, thank you. All right, one more. So this chart sets forth what we see as the opportunities for different kinds of, for government parties, private Thai investors, and foreign investors, what opportunities they have to apply for these cannabis licenses, and from now until the 2024.
But Michael, when we look at this table, the key takeaways is really the Thai government is establishing a window really through about August of 2024 to really help Thailand lay a foundation. That's the intent of the regulation, with government bodies, and then have private sector participation on the side, but they're really not controlling or driving it.
Right. So the implication of this is with this legal development, the government has given us all a picture, not a clear picture, but a picture of what the future regulatory environment should be like. Okay. So it says that there will be an opportunity for private parties, both Thai and foreign, to participate in the cannabis market. Okay. However, they've also set forth this exclusivity period to, in effect, give the government a head start. To say that for medical licenses, and when I say medical, the distinction between medical licenses and R&D licenses here seems to be that you need a medical license in order to engage in commercial activity. So in terms of volumes, a medical license may be much more interesting to have than only a research and development license. Okay, so they've stated that for this 5-year exclusivity or your even freeze out period, you could call it. Only government parties are allowed to have those very interesting medical licenses. And if you want to participate on those types of products, you have to partner with the government. So it puts the government in a very strong position until 2024.
And that's good. I think Thailand, it's just sort of a crawl, walk, run, and really 3.5 years is, well, just over 3.5 years is not that long in the master scheme of things. So they will learn a lot and hopefully then provide continued legislation. That's the anticipation if they want this industry to truly grow domestically and then the export side, right?
Yeah, and the other important takeaway here is that even though you can see these legal changes as incremental, there's nothing else like this going on anywhere in the region. So Thailand is really on the forefront here, even though change may not be happening as quickly as some would like.
So I'm just going to give some sort of commercial observations on the back of the legal framework and some of the implications that Michael just outlined. So really, I guess if you break it, if you look at the slide that's on your screen now, there's what we're referring to as commercial medical products, and the activities that can take place there is the cultivation. That's the actual growing, making arrangements for the land and what land is actually permissible. There are a host of other licenses that come with that, again, resting with the government body, and we'll talk about who those bodies can be, and then the actual extraction of the medicinal CBD primarily is where we're focused, and then there's the R&D side of it as well. Those are sort of the two I guess buckets of commercial opportunity, depending upon maybe speaking to the foreigners out there, where you could add expertise and begin to have commercial relationships. But again, you see the Thai government body could be a hospital, a clinic, a university. We'll get into this in some of the risk factors. So when we look at this, just because there's this, I mentioned all this tourism, medical tourism and wellness tourism. This legislation that's passed, and I think the medical direction, this high value added product and tourism, this is not about recreational cannabis. I've had many in the industry come up and ask me, is that coming? And obviously that would be a big driver to help boost tourism and arrivals. That is not the case today. I don't think it will be, but it could. It's really on the medical side and the wellness side. So
if you look at what implication this could have on the long-term Thailand medical tourism market, say compare what's going on right now in Korea versus what's going on in Thailand right now. In Korea, it looks like the only patients that can potentially benefit for the cannabis drugs that are being allowed to be imported are Korean citizens only. Here, but Thailand's situation is completely different because that distinction's not made. Okay, that's not that. There are regulations that you have to comply with, in terms of who produces, who sells. You have to get the right license, right? But here, there is an existing medical tourism market right now that could benefit a lot, long term, from allowing, say, tourists from medical tourists, patients from places where cannabis products are completely banned, like China, to come to Thailand, to come to approved medical clinics to receive CBD medicine and other types of medicine. So I think ultimately this could be a really interesting strategy by the government.
I do too. I think you do have to choose your government body carefully because they're going to account on a lot of leadership and transparency, as well as Michael said, your Thai partner, because setting aside how you set up the economics, you would only be able to have roughly, up to 1/3 of the registered capital and 1/3 of the board seats. So from a corporate governance and actual ownership standpoint, you have to take that into consideration. But that private sector entity, whether it's 100% Thai or the 2/3, 1/3 Thai foreign, some of the things that you would have to be noodling through would be land lease agreements and the license that supports that, and building on that, there could be sharecropping. There'll be a number of service agreements that come up place, the license of any technologies and know-how. There's could be financing side of it. Again, that could be at, say, the university R&D lab, or it could be actually at a medical teaching hospital, government, again, a government body. And then there's, I think, a lot of open armedness for technical and advisory services. So when you think about then, that's probably quite consistent with what you would see in other markets in the world when you would do any type of undertaking where there's, you know, several millions of dollars of investment. And then when it comes to the Thai and foreign, obviously you've got to have strong shareholder agreements, joint venture agreements, and whatever other licensing and advisory. Would you add to that at all?
Sure. So what a lot of what some potential foreign investors have been saying, that during this 5-year period, in which time their only opportunities to invest as a real stakeholder is to in maybe larger scale projects, is to be a minority shareholder with a Thai company that partners with the government. So that they think, well, their upside during this medium term is limited in that respect. So what people are thinking instead, well, you can look at it the other way. This is a very new industry with not that much infrastructure right now. So they're looking for opportunities to participate as a third-party service provider and technology provider, to license that technology to the government or to private parties, and to protect that way, because in that situation, your exposure to risk is less than if you're making a long-term investment in a company as a joint venture partner.
In brief, there's several critical success factors, and we've listed out about 9 or 10 here. A lot of these are very basic to whatever market you would go in regardless of the industry. The one or two that I guess Michael and I would amplify is making sure that government body is someone that you can work with over the long haul. And of course, you need to have the Thai partner. I'm speaking from a foreigner's perspective. But also, I think securing those licenses and what it says you can do, particularly as the domestic market opens, and also the level of production to reach some level of scale for the export of CBD products. So those are just be two things that I would mention. Or would you amplify any others on the list, Michael?
Yeah, and during this, the current period right now, okay, foreign investors have to be comfortable with a degree of uncertainty in terms of what the licensing requirements are right now. As we speak, ministerial regulations are being finalized, so I understand it will be finalized and enacted within this year, maybe, that will provide further details concerning what the application process and requirements for these licenses, what they'll be. You know, because everybody wants the ability to plan and to report back to their head office about likelihood of success and challenges they may face along the way. But a lot's happened since last year to clarify the situation. So the trend is clear. You know, that doesn't mean things can't change, of course. You know, but I think it's encouraging how much progress has happened in so little time.
It's as clear as it can be for Thailand, I think, which tends to lead. Now, this slide that's in front of you right now, this underscores, I guess, what I was mentioning in Thailand's EEC with some of the favored industries. But the Thailand Board of Investment is the branch of the government under the Ministry of Industry that actually provides the incentive framework, namely for tax deferrals, but also other incentives. There is no, for avoidance of doubt, there is no current BOI policy or incentive for the cannabis industry, full stop. However, there is a very well thought out program as far as the strategic pharmaceutical industry and medical equipment, but focusing on pharmaceuticals. I've listed here the two investment activities that are very much sought after and used. What's referred to as the active pharmaceutical ingredients, and you could see how cannabis could be part of that. And then the actual manufacturing of medicines, good old pharmacy. And the criteria, the BOI conditions, you can read these in front of you, but the incentives, these are some of the best holidays. It's called it could be an A2 or A3, or basically 5 to 8 year tax holidays with a whole host of benefits on importation, and then even some bonus periods depending upon how much R&D, how much training you do, and even certain locations here in the Kingdom of Thailand. This is something that's already in place and reinforcing the pharmaceutical industry that is there. This does not exist at this level, to my knowledge, in other ASEAN countries. Yeah.
Yes. So what we want to be headed towards is as as the legal requirements become more clear. Okay, you just like it happens in other heavily regulated industries like banking or insurance or pharma. So foreign investors will see what model works. What model can they confidently apply to Thailand for the long term? We're not there yet, but I think that I think that things are. I'm encouraged by the way things are progressing.
People do things, not documents. And even, I guess, we have listed out half dozen here risk factors. Some of these are quite obvious to you and would exist in other markets that might be of interest or that you're exploring. But I guess a couple that I would just point out unique to Thailand here is I think you do need to do your homework on the intellectual property protections. Thailand does have strong intellectual property, but it is currently silent or a little bit ambiguous as to how the IP is structured with regard to the seed DNA. The second one, number 5 there, where you see control risks. I think Michael said this best, you have to have a tolerance for risk and change. Your government body, I keep re-emphasizing this, and then this 1/3, 2/3 corporate ownership. You can strip out the economics any way you like through preference shares or service agreements, but it has to be fair and balanced. And Thai people, I think, are doing the right thing now. They don't want to feel like they're being commercially exploited. But this is an industry that is serious, but it has risks. Michael, would you emphasize?
Oh, for sure. So maybe my final comment would be that I've advised foreign investors in Thailand for going on 25 years, and I can say this is a new industry, but the model that I would use the same advice that I would give to other types of investors. You want to show whatever the regulating body is, here the Thai FDA, that you're a good faith investor. You're a long-term investor in Thailand with good intentions, and you want to do things the right way. You start with building the right relationship with the regulator, and being as you're in it to make money, of course, but to be forthcoming when you can be, and working with the regulator, knowing that it's a high risk environment for them as well, because there's not much experience, and if you do that, you'll be making an investment to the future success of your operation.
Okay, so great, at least as good as it gets right now in 2020 as we march into 2021 post-COVID. We have a regulatory framework that's pretty good. The table's set nicely. There still need to be some other milestones, but there's a defined period of about almost the next 4 years, 3.5, 4 years. We also have Thailand, feeds the world. They are a great exporter of fine food, quality products. I think their reputation is higher than maybe other ASEAN or other Asian countries, I would just say, in terms of the quality of the product and the transparency. The food industry has done well. You have this national tourism in general, because we're one of the top tourism rivals, but specific to medical and wellness, I think that cannot be underemphasized enough. And then we have a favorable investment framework for the pharmaceutical industry, not the cannabis yet, as it relates to pharmaceuticals, ingredients, and then manufacturing. So these are some nice cornerstones that exist today that we should be wary of. Yep. Be happy to take any questions, or maybe there are a couple of other recap slides here. Let's see. Yep.
So just, I wanted to make a special offer to attendees. the third edition of my book, Doyle's Practical Guide to Business Law in Asia. It covers Thailand, China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, Malaysia. Okay, it compares the foreign investment rules in each of those countries. I'm happy to provide a free copy to any attendees if you send me an email.
Free? Was that FREE? Free?
Free of charge.
Very generous. If there are any questions, you can probably message them in, or is there any from the audience here today? Or if not, I really thank you to the organizer for putting this summit together. I think it has a lot of momentum, and the industry will continue to do well. Michael?
Yeah. So thanks again for this opportunity. This is really an interesting new area for Thailand, and we're very happy to participate.